Why do we pay tax on what we earn and on the goods we buy and the things we use? Because without the money we give our governments, we would not have health systems to look after us when we're sick, or people to take care of the infrastructure in our towns and cities, or the services that keep us safe. And we couldn't establish schools, universities, or colleges to give us the opportunity to make a living. Although the economic downturn in Europe in the past few years has brought significant hardship to some, there are enough of us paying tax to keep most basic services going. But if we want to make sure that our society's needs are met, especially in tough financial climates, then we need to make sure that everyone pays their taxes. Even in these hard times, hundreds of multinational companies are making huge profits, but many of them don't pay enough tax. Some of them don't pay any tax at all on their profits. In Europe, people have begun to demand that multinationals pay their fair share of tax. Big companies like Apple, Google, and Starbucks have recently been accused of paying too little. They may dispute the reports, but the fact is that companies like these and hundreds of others manage to exploit loopholes so that they sometimes pay little or no tax in some countries, despite making millions of dollars there. In the world's poorest countries, most people don't earn enough to pay tax. And governments don't always have the capacity to collect it systematically from those who can. So taxes paid by foreign nationals operating in these countries really matter. If multinational companies paid their fair share of taxes in the countries where they make their money, then those tax dollars could be used to make a huge difference to the lives of people who have very little. But many of them don't. And so developing countries struggle with what is known as capital flight.
Capital flight is money which should have been invested in Africa, but which, because people want to evade paying taxes where they are based or in the countries where they originate from, they sent it out to other jurisdictions where the tax rates are lower. So the money actually flows from Africa to those jurisdictions. Africa is not able anymore to benefit from those funds.
Let's imagine there's a mining company in Africa making millions of dollars extracting minerals from beneath the soil. But the company says it makes no profit in the African country. Where has all the money gone? It seems the money has gone on holiday to one of about 60 tax havens around the world. The mine might have sold the minerals extracted in Africa at a very low price to a subsidiary company with an office, though not much else, in a tax haven. Because they sold the minerals so cheaply, there was very little profit, and so they paid very little tax to the country in which their mine is located.
Tax dodging in Zambia is a serious problem because we who work on these issues link it to our poverty levels in this nation. Because we know that we are not a poor country. We know that we have very rich minerals in our ground. And we also know that the price of copper is at an all-time high. We also know that the investors who have come to invest in our country are not paying the full value of tax that should go to Zambians.
Meanwhile, in the tax haven, this phantom company sells the minerals on to a country in Europe for a much larger price. But they don't pay much, if any, tax on that sale either, despite the fact that their profits were larger, because that's what a tax haven is, a place where companies pay low tax on their profits. This makes the shareholders of the mining company very happy indeed. But is what they've done fair? Is it fair that money is moved and hidden and almost no tax is paid in a country where 50% of the people live below the poverty line, where children die because there's no fresh water or medicine or food, where every tax dollar dodged makes the poor even poorer? No, it's not fair. But how can we fix it? We can hope that the companies realize the injustice themselves and change the way they operate. But if they don't, then transparency will help, forcing what's hidden and secret out into the open.
En el Perú, todo el tema de la tributación es prácticamente reservado, ¿no? Se maneja bajo el secreto total y absoluto. Es decir, la sociedad civil, la población peruana en general, no tiene acceso a toda la información sobre los tributos que pagan estas empresas.
Greater transparency will do two things. The first one is that it will make it much more difficult for multinational companies to shift profits from developing countries to other countries. And it will also make it less easier for tax havens to hide that profit. When these two things happen, the underlying result is that there will be a system where profits and losses that are made by multinational companies can be tracked on a country-by-country basis. And then they will be able to appropriately tax these companies, and therefore the monies that are needed and required will be made available for development.
When we have greater transparency at the international level in terms of tax payment, we will have a lot more revenue in our country, because the companies that operate in our environment, lots of them are also companies that operate in other countries. Therefore, when you achieve transparency at the international level, it will translate into higher revenues for us.
At the moment, many developing countries depend on the aid they get from wealthier nations. The irony is that tax dodging costs developing countries more than they receive in aid.
Africa is financing the world. There's much more money flowing out of Africa to the north through existing global architecture, which enable the rich, both the elites in Africa and also multinational corporations that are operating in Africa, to move resources from the south to the north.
Currently, companies only have to report their profits on a global basis. But what if companies were made to declare their profits in each country where they do business, including tax havens? What if we could ensure that information about commercial wealth in tax havens is shared with tax authorities in other countries? Or what if the real owners of all the phantom and shell companies had to identify themselves in a public register? Then tax money would go to the countries where profits were made, and the conditions for the world's poorest people could improve dramatically. If we could use public pressure to push through new tax rules, then not only will dependency on aid diminish, but countries will have the chance to become more politically stable.
It's commonly known, most of the evidence is that for countries that raise most of their money from tax, they build their own local systems of democracy. The citizens have a bigger say.
$160 billion flies out of developing countries each year. That's the amount in tax not paid by multinational corporations. Imagine that. Imagine what developing countries could do with that money. They could provide fresh water, roofs over families' heads, enough food, hospitals and medicine to help those who are sick, schools to educate and improve the prospects of their children. Imagine? You don't have to. You can help to make this happen. Only public pressure will make the difference. To find out how, go online. It's in your hands.